Hello and welcome to Daytime, your place for scary stories straight from the horror forums of Reddit. Make sure to like and subscribe for more horror tales of things that go bumping the night. On tonight's episode, a rare item collector wins a valuable antique at an auction that has ties to the spiritual world. So, no matter what you do, please don't finish the 3,000-piece chimeric challenge puzzle.
I'm what's called a set collector. I find and restore sets of vintage auctionables and sell them as complete sets for high-end clients. I originally came out to Lewisburg to put a bid on a near-complete set of original The Phantom comics. The collection was about a dozen short, but none of the missing issues were that rare. It was a slam dunk. It might take some time to get them graded, but if I could find a serious buyer, that wouldn't be a problem. I won the bid and was ready to call it a day when they announced a surprise item. These are always good. A complete 1923 chimeric challenger. 3,000-piece puzzle. Holy shit. For those not in the know, the chimeric challenger is famously misprinted. They were discontinued because the cutting machine had some kind of malfunction. Some pieces were stuck together and had to be cut with scissors to be assembled. Others were just plain wood, completely missing the print. Some had entire segments missing from the box. It was a commercial failure, specifically because there were seemingly no complete sets. So to have a complete 3,000-piece chimeric challenger, their largest and final creation, that's big money. I got it for $2,600. I've seen incomplete sets go for about $8,000, so I could probably get past $15,000 if I could find the right collector. The only problem was that while the previous owner insisted that it was complete, there was no certificate. So I would have to put it together just to verify. Honestly, I was way more excited about the chimeric challenger than my Phantom set. It was good money, but this was unique, rare, an actual challenge to put together and put into the hands of the right person. I got back home. I was greeted by my wall of collectibles, amassed from years of digging through countless yard sales and storage units. My crowning achievement was a vintage Mickey Mouse pocket watch placed under a little glass dome, lit with a mild yellow RGB light. The thing wasn't that rare or expensive, but it was special to me. It was the exact watch my mom hadn't been able to afford me for my 6th birthday. It represented everything I'd grown into. Someone who found things. Someone with the confidence and means to get what I want. I pulled a half-nighter finding the missing Phantom issues. By 4 a.m., I'd found all but 2, and those were just standard issues from the 80s. A bit tricky to find a seller, but dirt cheap. I just had to find the right shop, and yet I could barely get any sleep. I was so excited to get started with the chimeric challenger. I put out my white cotton gloves, set my alarm for 8, and put a timer on my coffee maker. As soon as that bell rang, I'd shoot out of bed like a boxer ready for round 1. As I closed my eyes that night, a single thought itched to the back of my mind. I didn't have the slightest idea what was printed on the puzzle. After a few hours of twisting and turning, I was finally standing next to the box with a steaming cup of coffee ready to go. I put on my headset and gave my West Coast guy, Lenny, a call. He was usually up at night, chatting with some of his East Asian clients. He picked up on the first signal.
What you got?
"Got," he answered. "You know any puzzle people, Lenny?" I asked. "High-end."
Are we talking Rachel Page stuff, collector shit, curios?
"Curios?" "I sent you a picture." The chimeric challenger came in a plain wooden box with a simple company logo on the side. The logo, a sunflower print, had faded to a shade of gray, a far cry from the original azure blue.
You challenger?
Challenger?
He asked.
How many missing?
Many missing.
Shut up.
Shut up.
No.
No.
Yeah, and check this out. I sent him another picture. This time of the side of the box, where you could kind of tell the number 3,000 from the remaining print. Again, faded to a gray.
And you're telling me you got a full set? 3,000 pieces?
3,000 pieces.
You got it verified?
You got it verified?
Gonna put it together, I sighed. But yeah, it's a...
You haven't checked it?
You haven't checked it?
Look, you can't throw around complete set before you get it verified. These things are notorious.
They're notorious.
I'm asking you to keep your beady weasel eyes open.
I'll call you a dumbass for not verifying it if that's what you want.
If that's what you want.
I'm serious, this is big league collector stuff. Minnesota.
And if you get it verified, I'll shower you with roses.
You with roses.
Lenny hung up and I got to work. I took pictures of the box in every angle, noting the company address on the bottom right. Tomskog, Minnesota. Original print. I put on my cotton gloves and carefully opened the box. There were 30 identical plastic bags inside, each numbered to contain 100 pieces. Unfortunately, the seal was already broken. That probably set me back a couple of thousands. I photographed everything and opened the first bag. I went through all the pieces slowly and carefully. I double-checked them for bad prints and weak tabs. Putting it together would be the last thing I did. It took me roughly 4 hours to get to the 1,000 piece mark. So far, so good. I hadn't put the pieces together yet, but I saw some rough shades of blue, black, white skin, and a hammer. I got the impression that it was a portrait, possibly of a worker. Maybe a factory worker? I could see something rough and metallic, possibly a printing press. I saw some kind of denim texture. I spent all day checking the rest of the pieces, sending updates to Lenny along the way. The thing was pristine. Not a single wobbly tab or weak print. These pieces had probably never been properly assembled. By 9 p.m., I was completely done. Every piece checked, verified, and returned to their plastic bags. They were all perfect. Well, as perfect as a 100-year-old puzzle could be. Now I just had to put it together to make sure there were no misprints in context. There could be some kind of mix-up that I'd missed. By the end of the night, Lenny told me he had a potential buyer. They were only interested in a complete set, so I had to put it together to make sure. But if it was legit, we were looking at an $18,000 to $19,000 payout, plus commission fees. The next day, I ordered the final issues of The Phantom and got ready to put the puzzle together. I put on an audiobook, uploaded all my pictures from the previous day, and got to work. Now, putting together a 3,000-piece puzzle takes time. If I spent all day working on it, about 12 hours, it'd still take me several days to finish. Probably another day since I had to be careful about the pieces. So I cracked my knuckles, turned off all notifications, and zoned out. Around lunchtime, I'd put together a few edge pieces and a dozen pieces showing a hand holding a hammer. A dirty, labor-roughened hand with black nails and deep blue bruises around the knuckles. I took a short break. I covered the pieces with a cotton cloth and made myself a sandwich. The Phantom collection was basically complete. So I put some feelers out looking for a buyer. I found the final issues and placed an order. Most of the time, my collections don't come to me complete. The Chimeric Challenger was a bit different that way. Usually I had to track down missing pieces or incomplete sets. That was part of the job. Having it served to me like this felt like cheating. As I got back to the puzzle, I got the sense that something was different. I removed the flowery cotton cover, taking in the smell of the old wood. I could have sworn I'd only put 12 pieces together for the arm. And yet, there were 13 connected pieces. Strange. When you solve puzzles, you start with the edges. That was my strategy too, but I couldn't keep myself from assembling whatever random pieces I found along the way. Mostly background pieces showing parts of shelves and metal flooring. Long after the sun had set, I tore myself away from the puzzle. I put the cotton cover back, chugged a Red Bull, and double-checked my socials. I had a lot of missed calls. Missed calls are often missed opportunities. I couldn't afford those, but this had to get done. I spent another few hours rifling through offers, tips, and various rumors. Apparently, there'd been some talk about the Chimeric Challenger. Maybe Lenny asking around stirred something up. I went through every post about it. The consensus was clear. There were no complete Chimeric Challenger sets. A few of them had managed to put together complete sets by combining boxes, but that only worked for the 100 and 500-piece sets. The 3,000-piece sets were all unique, one poster said. That's why they didn't spoil the picture on the box. It was a collector's item. I was just about to click on a link when I heard a sound. It sounded like a click, but it didn't come from my mouse. Instead, I looked over at the covered puzzle. I walked over to it, scratching my eyes. I just stood there, looking at the flowery print of the cotton cover. Had I really heard something, or was it just sleep deprivation? Even if I'd heard something, what made me think it came from the puzzle? But no. I wasn't that person anymore. I was confident. I got what I wanted. I removed the cover and counted the assembled pieces. Edges looked fine. No problem there. But the hand with the hammer? 14 pieces, not 13. I counted, recounted, and recounted again. Had it been 14 all along? I hadn't written 13 anywhere, and I was starting to doubt myself. Puzzles don't assemble themselves. I counted the pieces so many times that the image of that hand holding the hammer burned into my eyes. I wiped the sweat from my brow, reminding myself to put on clean cotton gloves the next day. "It's 14, I said out loud, putting it down on a post-it. It is 14 pieces. Not 13, it was 14. I covered it back up. That night I slept like a rock. I dreamt about laborers, people with shovels, hammers, saws, and chisels. I dreamt about a hazy workshop full of acidic compounds, people yelling back and forth, a large man with an anchor tattooed on his forearm, a 12-year-old with a bucket, handing out cups of water poured from a hand-carved wooden ladle, the smell of oil, tar, and something sweet, a flour press making a potent dye. The workers all had blue hands, all of them, all except the foreman. He wielded a hammer. Something clicked. I woke up. I'd only been asleep for an hour, but I was shaking and wide awake. I tried going back to sleep, but there was a struggle in the back of my head. Part of me was telling me to stop being an idiot. Part of me wanted to go back to count. It had been 12 pieces. Then it was 13, then 14. It had been 13, I had to stop doubting myself. I cursed out loud and got up. This was the final time. I stomped up to the table, removed the cover, and counted. I didn't even bother to check the edge pieces. 16. There were 2 more pieces assembled, completing the hammer. I leaned back in my chair, looking at the post-it note. It clearly said 14. There was no doubt anymore. There were more pieces assembled now than earlier that night. But what the hell did that mean? I put the cloth back over the puzzle and just watched it. I must have sat there over an hour, nodding in and out of a restless sleep. At one point, I didn't know if I was awake or not. My eyes were open, but I didn't really register anything I was seeing. And there, in that dreamlike moment, I saw something move under the cotton cover, followed by another wooden click. I must have fallen asleep as I woke up hours later, still sitting in my chair. I had some missed calls, a few items that had to be sent, and a few phantom issues to pick up at the post office. And yet, I felt uneasy leaving the chimeric challenger. I tried telling myself I'd imagined it, but I couldn't fool myself. Instead, I put my hand on the cotton cloth and took a deep breath. I didn't want to know. I didn't want to count them. I didn't want there to be more. Just as I steeled myself, my phone rang. Lenny. I breathed a sigh of relief. Saved by the bell.
If this is legit, we're looking at a paycheck. Not table scraps. A fat double quarter-pounder paycheck. I can't find a single person with a complete 3,000-piece set.
Single person with a complete 3,000-piece set.
You telling...
Imagine big brown sacks with dollar signs on them and the satisfaction of proving me wrong, but you gotta verify it.
And of proving me wrong. But you gotta verify it.
Get on it.
Hang on. I'll send you a
Big dollar signs like you're a cartoon villain robbing a bank.
Like you're a cartoon villain robbing a bank.
They get to work.
Clear picture, Lenny. Thank you.
Get to work.
I looked up at my Mickey Mouse pocket watch. I'd earned it. I'd been sure of myself, and I made it work. This would be no different. It took me about 2 hours to finish up my chores, sent out a couple of surplus items, picked up a few of the Phantom comics, downed a box of gas station sushi, and got back home. I substituted my audiobook for rock and roll and got into the vibe. I didn't even count the pieces, I just started putting them together, sorting them by color, mouthing the words to Detroit Rock City while looking for matching boot pieces. This was work, that's all that mattered. The guy in the picture had his labor, I had mine. I kept taking progress pics to send to Lenny later. This would be another full day. I stopped for a dinner break at about 6 p.m. I heated up some canned ravioli and reviewed the pictures. It was fun just to see how far I'd come. I'd finished the entire frame and started working my way in. I'd gotten a large chunk of metal flooring in, connected to a large segment of background wall. At least 600 pieces all in all. Then I noticed something. I went back and forth between my pictures. I tried arranging them, putting one over the other, making sure they were the same size. I couldn't get the arm to overlay. All the other pieces were fine, but not the arm with the hammer. It was as if it wasn't in the same angle from one picture to the next, as if it had moved. I looked over at the flowery claw, feeling that icy block of doubt sink back into my stomach. Without all the music, without the bravado, it was just me and this mystery. One by one, I sent the progress pics to Lenny. And as I hit send on the last one...
I got the guy.
Lenny, I started. You got a...
The guy.
What?
The guy, a client, he's interested.
Okay, sure, but...
No, you don't understand. He's on the other line. He wants to talk.
Now?
You need a second?
Lenny, there's an issue.
Is this gonna keep us from making bank?
I took a deep breath. I wasn't sure I couldn't be. No, I don't think so.
Then you're on in 5.
There was an electronic tone, followed by 2 signals. All of a sudden, Lenny was off the line. There was a stranger on the other end. A stranger with an old, wheezing voice. I sat there, listening to him breathe for a few seconds. Clearly, a smoker.
You got the full set?
He asked. I think so, yeah. Putting it together as we speak.
Don't do that.
There was an urgency. Like he'd waited for just the right time to say it. Preparing himself. It was the clearest thing he'd said so far.
Don't do it.
He repeated.
Tear it apart.
Why would I do that?
Can't you feel it?
I looked back at the flowery cloth. Had it really moved the other night? Had the picture changed? 12 pieces. 13, 14, 16. I hadn't even counted them since. 2 dozen? 3?
They are incomplete by design, by necessity. It shouldn't be complete.
Maybe it isn't.
Make sure of it. Disassemble it, separate the pieces, and never look at it again.
I can't just... I got up from my chair, seeing the setting sun bounce off the glass dome protecting the Mickey Mouse pocket watch. I wanted this, and I was going to get it. If you want to take it off my hands, I'm sure Lenny will get you a fair price, I sighed. But if you excuse me, I got work to do.
Don't do this.
I hung up, and for the rest of the night, I didn't bother counting. I called it a day just past midnight. I face-planted into bed, leaving the playlist rolling. I'd just catch a few hours of sleep, then get back to it. I wasn't going to drag this out. This was business, and I was going to handle it. But I couldn't help myself from dreaming. Maybe the fumes from the box got to me. Maybe it was just a different, intrusive headspace. Either way, I imagined myself back in that hazy workshop. I imagined myself waking up. A man with blue hands shaking my shoulder. Our lunch break was over, and I was slacking off. I had this mind-numbing task of putting the same varnish on wooden boxes over and over and over. The smell was so strong that I couldn't even feel it anymore. There was a noise further down the hall. A hammer coming down again and again. Screams, pleading, flesh. We knew better than to stop. You didn't quit this job. No one did. I woke up to a sudden clatter, something falling onto the floor. My eyes shot open. There were puzzle pieces scattered across the carpet. And a bloody hammer. Specks of blood covered the flowery cotton cover. The hammer just lay there on the floor, clear as day. A few puzzle pieces had fallen off the table. I picked up the hammer, feeling the weight of it in my hand. A sticky handle covered in loose strands of hair. I pulled the cotton cover aside. The chimeric challenger was almost complete. The puzzle revealed a man in denim overalls, covered in cuts, bruises, and scars. The only thing missing was his head, that hadn't been put together yet. He didn't have a hammer in his hand anymore. He did, however, have colored hands. But they weren't blue like the workers I'd dreamt of. They were blood red. I'd forgotten to turn notifications back on. I had hundreds. Row after row of texts from the same number, over and over. All of them telling me to please destroy the puzzle. Burn it. Throw it away. Tear the pieces apart and just walk away. Missed calls. Offers to pay me to get rid of it. Calls from Lenny. Calls from unknown numbers. Pleading, desperate messages. The last message was sent just minutes before I woke up, asking me to please save his life. For his children's sake. For his grandchildren. And finally, an email from Lenny. No wonder he wants it that bad, Lenny wrote. He's a Tomskog native. His dad probably helped make the thing. My pulse raced. I held the bloody hammer in my hand. This was real. This wasn't a trick of the mind. There were only about 40 pieces left to assemble. No one quits the job. Enough. I picked it all up and showed it into the box, abandoning all care and common sense. I showed it all in there, bending the tabs and snapping the corners. I saw the pieces bend and break, hearing the wood snap. I forced the lid shut, put it under my arm, and left. I was going to burn it in the yard, but it was snowing outside. I decided to throw it off a bridge instead. There's this bridge not too far from where I live where the water never really freezes. I drove up there, parked, and got out. I brought the hammer. I put the puzzle down and just started smashing it with the hammer. I watched a flock of red birds take flight, frightened by the sudden noise. Finally, I heaved it all over the edge, watching the broken wooden pieces plop into the river. As the pieces sailed into the rushing water, I felt this immense sense of relief. And with that, I dropped the hammer into the river as well. The color from the broken puzzle pieces had given my hands a faint sheen of blue. I used some snow to scrub it off. I texted Lenny, telling him the puzzle was incomplete. I didn't even bother to check his response. I'd wasted so much time and money on this, but I still felt like I'd dodged a bullet, like I'd been on the cusp of something terrible. I headed home. I spent the rest of the day trying to find a buyer for the Phantom collection. I'd gained the attention of a few big names. Apparently, the rumor of me having a chimeric challenger had also gotten out. There were quite a few messages about it. I made up a copy-paste response to get rid of them. I tried my best just to get back to work, ignoring the puzzle and everything about it. I didn't want to know what had happened. I didn't want to think about it. And yet, I could still see some blue powder under my fingernails. That night, just before bed, I scrubbed myself clean. But no matter how hard I scrubbed my hands, I could still see little blue stains on my skin. Maybe it wasn't really there. That night, I could barely sleep at all. I fell in and out of consciousness, as if my body was keeping me awake. And still, I caught some snippets of another life. A life that also had blue powder on its hands at one point. I imagined people putting down their tools. Someone getting beaten to death for insubordination. The 12-year-old boy putting down his bucket of water. Finally, a hammer raised even at him. Then, a gunshot. My eyes were wide open. I sat up, letting my legs fall off the edge of the bed. I dug my toes into the carpet. I tried to calm down, to let myself rest. Then I felt something brush against my toe. Something at the edge of the carpet. A puzzle piece. It must have bounced off when the pieces fell off the table. It depicted the top of a bald man's head, with a gunshot wound in the forehead. The eyes in the puzzle piece turned to me, meeting my gaze. Glass shattered. Footsteps. I hurried into my closet, hiding behind my collection of robes. I heard uneven footsteps fumble their way inside. Water dripping onto the hardwood floor in the hallway. Something metallic brushing against the wall. It was dark, but I could see the outline of it as it stepped into my bedroom. A body, broken. A man with every bone twisted by hammer blows. A wheezing, rattling breath from a vibrating tongue. The top of his head was missing. The man from the puzzle. The chimeric challenger. I held his puzzle piece in my hand. He used his hammer as a cane for the blind, feeling his way forward, brushing it against the walls. As soon as he found the bed where I'd slept, he lost his composure. He made this unearthly sound, ripping the covers and pillows into pieces, waving the hammer around with his broken limbs. He could barely stand on his ruined legs. Every step, every swing was agony. I could hear the rage and frustration bubbling up from his exposed throat, the hammer bringing down paintings, pictures, shelves, and my priceless collectible. All of a sudden, the doors to the closet were ripped from the hinges, broken fingers wrapped around my throat. I held up the final puzzle piece like a shield, hoping it would all just go away. "Take it!" I screamed. "Just fucking take it!" But there was no discussion, no thought. He just started beating me to death with that goddamn hammer. That first blow connected with my jaw, breaking it. The second hit fractured my right upper arm. It was so fast that I didn't even understand what was happening. The third hit connected with my shoulder. I didn't even realize I dropped the puzzle piece. The dark turned red, and for a moment I could feel the texture of metal flooring against my cheek. I could see the haze of the workshop. I'd tried to quit. The foreman wasn't having it. Fingers grabbing the roots of my hair, more hammer blows, my forehead burning, my head ringing, my world started spinning as my inner ear gave up. Another blow, another. I tried pleading for help, but I couldn't form words through my broken jaw. Instead, I just lay there, wheezing, just like the foreman. All of a sudden, it stopped. A hammer clattered to the ground. I saw the glass dome with my Mickey Mouse pocket watch. It was still intact, resting on my bed. I wanted this. I wanted to live. I grabbed the hammer, flipped it, and used it to drag myself across the floor. I kept losing my grip from the bleeding. But I made it. Months of physical therapy. Dozens of surgeries. And I still can't lift my arm over my head. When I stretch one way, I can feel this deep ache still lingering in my jaw. Turns out he accidentally smashed the final puzzle piece when he tried to beat me to death. I guess in a strange way, he destroyed himself. Now, I still see people looking to complete sets of the Chimeric Challenge puzzles. There are 8 auctions for various pieces going on right now. Some for 300 pieces, one looking to complete a set for a 1,000-piece puzzle. And that's why I'm asking that we please, as a community, never talk of these again.
Hello and welcome to Daytime, your place for scary stories, straight from the horror forums of Reddit. Make sure to like and subscribe for more horror tales of things that go bumping the night. On tonight's episode, a man's hired by a friend to work for a startup discovers that the office is hiding a dark secret. So, have you ever struggled with addiction? Because this is how we became addicted to our office.
A few years ago, I got back in touch with an old friend of mine. Phil had always been a bit of a visionary. He could make anything sound convincing, so when he suggested I move down to Oklahoma City to work with him at his startup, there was no way I'd say no. The business plan seemed solid, and he'd already laid the groundwork. The first 3 employees had been Phil himself, his college roommate Lance, and this guy named Milan, who they'd flown in from Slovenia, an actual computer wizard. I was among the second generation of hires, along with 6 others. He had this idea of an event planning business centered around corporate culture, company outings, conventions, events, and all comforts in between. Phil knew there was enough demand for someone to deal with that kind of stuff at several large firms. I was brought on as a front-end developer. Basically, I make sure you can click things. I connect the back-end systems to an easily navigated front and present it in an inviting way. I've got a background in user experience, HCI, and various evaluation processes. Focus groups, cognitive walkthroughs, user cases, personas, that's my jam. I make clever solutions, test them, and measure results. You could say I Fab 5, whatever system we need to make interactive. So that's how I got involved. By the time I got there, they'd changed the company name to Marion and Landing Corporate Events. Apparently, having a double name tested well with investors. My first day was pretty much everyone's first day. M&L had relocated to a large office space, a company incubator a few blocks from downtown OKC. Phil made a big deal of it with ribbon cutting and handing out our pass cards in a sort of offbeat ceremony. We all got our desk spaces assigned. There was cake, and all 10 of us had to take turns introducing ourselves. The place had been fixed up a bit, but I'm pretty sure the wall-to-wall carpet was at least from the late 80s. We spent most of that day just setting up our workspace, installing software, setting up the infrastructure, reviewing our workplace routines. I spent the day being ping-ponged between Phil talking short-term gain and Lance talking big futures, scalability. It worried me in a way. I could tell these two would have trouble cooperating in the long term. The first time I got to talk to Milan, we were in the conference room, grabbing a second piece of cake. I found him staring at something in the corner and walked up to see what it was. Someone had given us a flower as part of our welcome package. There was a little gift basket and a nice little yellow flower pot. It had a little welcome sign and everything. The flower itself was a bit weird though. Some kind of sunflower, but smaller and with a blue tint. had a strange smell to it. A present from the previous tenants, perhaps, or the landlord. "It'll be dead in a week," I sighed.
Sorry.
Milan looked at me with wide eyes as if I'd said something inappropriate. The flower? I can never keep those alive for long."
Oh.
He chuckled.
Oh, yes.
He patted me on the shoulder and gave me the widest smile. He left the conference room, only to turn in the doorway.
Dead in a week.
He chuckled.
Just can't help it.
The following days were a lot less fun. Phil was on a tight schedule. He'd promised a major investor a working prototype on a tight deadline and a first version by the end of the month. He had this big speech about responsibility and camaraderie and how we would all have to pitch in to make ends meet.
This is an adventure.
He beamed at the morning meeting.
We're going through dangerous woods, and some days we're gonna have to ditch our backpacks to get away from angry bears. We might have to trek through stinking swamps or fend off wolves with nothing but sharp sticks. I won't lie. This is gonna be tough, but I promise you that at the end of that journey, there'll be a beautiful meadow.
I listened to the best of my ability, but I couldn't ignore that our new office flower was already looking a bit beat. And it had only been a day. It was all hands on deck. I didn't have much time to think about anything outside of font choices, domain names, verification procedures, and meetings. Every goddamn day, meetings. I've worked on Scrum projects before, but this was ridiculous. Still, we did good work. We made the deadline for the working prototype. We hit a few snags, and we got some feedback that might be hard to act on, but overall, it worked out in our favor. Strangely enough, the office sunflower still hung in there. I'd completely forgotten about it. It still had the little welcome sign, and it had turned completely blue. The petals were sagging. If it wasn't dead already, it was dying. As I looked it over in the dreary conference room, Lance knocked on the door. This guy was 3 years younger than me, and about as type A as you can get. Vicious go-getter and visionary, whose family had deep enough pockets for him to afford failure. He tried to keep some sort of corpo surfer dude look, but he just seemed out of place. He walked in noticing me looking over the office flower. Without a word, he walked up to it and picked it up. A few petals tumbled to the ground.
Poor thing.
He said,
You think it'll make it?
"I don't know," I shrugged. "It's been indoors and unwatered for a week. It is either dead or a vampire."
I think we'll be okay.
Lance said, putting it back down.
I don't see no fangs.
As we struggled to meet deadline after deadline after deadline, that first week had suddenly turned into a month. Phil was sounding a bit less optimistic. Lance mostly just sat by his window, trying to figure out some impossible resource puzzle. Milan was working pretty much around the clock. I swear the guy had a sleeping bag next to his coat, and I never actually saw him leave. By the end of the month, we ended up in another meeting. This time, it wasn't quite as positive. Phil's tie was loose, and Lance was uncharacteristically quiet.
I'll just say it.
Phil sighed.
This is not sustainable.
A month in, and we were already cutting 3 people loose. On top of that, we had a new deadline. 2 weeks. That's when the first version had to be available. There was an actual gasp around the table.
A big client is ready to sign us.
Explained Phil.
Hatchet Investments. We're talking long-term contracts, but they have other options, and if we can't get this up and running by then, they're dropping us. If this company is to survive, we have to look forward. Always forward.
I was mentally checked out. The amount of work we could expect was staggering, and just thinking about the upcoming late nights drained me. I found my thoughts and eyes constantly drifting away from the charts and explanations, desperately looking for something to latch onto, like the office flower. By now, it was as dead as could be. The petals littered the floor, but the welcome sign remained. Things got ugly fast. Phil started handing out free takeout to everyone who stayed late, and we got an extra couch just for sleeping. Luckily, most of us didn't have any other arrangements. Many of us were single and childless, so there wasn't anyone relying on us being home at a certain time. Incidentally, all 3 people who had been cut loose had rich family lives. We got into this rhythm. All day, every day, all we did was work. At one point, I saw Milan washing himself with a sponge in the communal kitchen. Lance was handing out company t-shirts for those who hadn't showered. Takeout boxes were piling up. Still, we soldiered on. We trusted Phil and his vision that there'd be a green pasture past the brambles. But man, were those some deep brambles.
Hey man, are you okay?
The voice hit me out of nowhere. I snapped out of a daze and found myself looking at a man. I was standing in the hallway, holding the door open to a stranger.
I'm here for the, quality assurance position.
He said,
Is Lance in?
Yeah, sure, I said. He's around. Of course he was. We all were. I invited the young man in, but found myself confused. I was second-guessing myself. My phone had long since run out of battery, and I hadn't even considered charging it. I looked at the young man, who kept shifting his eyes at me. Excuse me, but my phone is broken. It's the 15th, right? I asked.
18th.
He answered.
Surprised to see you guys working Saturdays.
So was I. I'd thought it was a Wednesday. I walked up to Phil, who was half asleep at his desk. I saw Lance invite the young man into the conference room, right across from the dead office flower. No one had had time to clean it up. I'm gonna head home, I said. Get a fresh pair, shower, have some fruit.
Yeah, you do that.
Mumbled Phil as he shifted in his seat. His face was stuck to his keyboard, leaving deep marks on his chin.
Get back soon.
Just a few hours, I yawned. I'll get the presentation done by the morning meeting.
No slacking.
None. I headed out the door, but as soon as I stepped out, I had this violent coughing attack. It felt like I'd tried to inhale a handful of needles, as tiny pricks of pain invaded my throat. I leaned against the wall, gasping for air. I don't suffer from allergies or asthma, but I can imagine this being something similar. For a moment, it just felt like I was dying. Like my body was rejecting something foreign. I scrambled back into the office as my coworkers stared daggers at me. I downed 3 glasses of tap water and hunched over the kitchen sink. The pain subsided. A brief calm settled in my chest as the sound of my heartbeat turned down from a banging assault rifle to a soft, steady drum. I figured I might as well get back to work. But it wasn't that simple. By the time I got back to my desk, I looked around. It occurred to me that pretty much no one was working anymore. Milan was half asleep on the couch, swiping on Tinder. Phil was fast asleep at his desk. My other 3 colleagues were either browsing social media or blankly staring out the window, wrapped in a blanket. At some point, we'd all just stop. We were just living there. The young man that Lance had interviewed hurried out of the conference room. I could see Lance leaning back in his chair, taking a sitting nap. Had he fallen asleep during the interview? I hurried to catch up to the young man, waving him down by the entrance. Excuse me, I said. Everything okay in there?
I'm sorry, but I can't work in this environment. That guy is clearly on drugs. Half of you seem to be having a mental breakdown, and...
The young man stammered, waving his arms around.
And the smell. And I'm not just talking about the pizza boxes, man. It's something in the walls. Like old bread or something. Can't you smell it?
The pizza boxes, sure, but I took a few deep breaths. No biggie. A bit dusty, but that was it. I just looked at him and shrugged.
Y'all got problems,
He said, shaking his head.
Good luck.
I got back to my desk and placed my hand on my comfortable office chair. I could just plop back down and try to get the presentation done. But had I already given up on going home? That was fast. I decided to try again. I buttoned up my jacket, took another swig of water, and walked out the door. I made it 20 steps. That sharp pain came back to my throat, spreading like a burning centipede all the way down to my diaphragm. It was this black, all-consuming pain. Blinding, violent medical condition kind of pain. I just lay there, gasping for air. I couldn't move. My eyes were watering, and I could feel tension building in my head. My chest was caving in on itself as my body turned over every nook and cranny, looking for oxygen. All I'd done was walk out the door. Now I lay dying in the corridor. My vision was just a pin, a speck of light, but gradually I could feel the coil loosening over my chest. I was being moved. An eternity later, I found myself on the sleeping couch, being gently slapped awake. Milan looked down at me, trying to force that wide smile back. It didn't work. It didn't look genuine against those sunken, exhausted eyes.
Don't push too hard.
He nodded.
Dead in a week.
Dead in a week, I agreed. He chuckled, patted me on the shoulder, and wandered off. I stayed there, trying to figure out what was happening. Once the chest pain subsided and my throat was cleared, I decided to test this further. So, it turns out, I physically couldn't leave the office. It wasn't a matter of distance, but time. The longer I was out of the office, the worse I got. Even a single step outside the door and I began feeling symptoms of asphyxiation. But it seemed like I was the only one who cared. Everyone else was either asleep or just lounging. I tried talking to Milan again, but he didn't seem to understand. I tried waking Phil, but he just dismissed me. Lance was leaning back in his chair, mouth wide open and snoring loudly in the conference room. Still, I had to try something. Conference room was my best bet. Excuse me, as I said, sitting down across from Lance. I need to talk to him. His head came up with a yawn. He cleared his eyes, scratched his stubble, and looked at me with an honest confusion. There's something wrong here, I said. We're sick.
Sure, yeah.
Lance leaned over into the corner of the room and picked up the yellow flower pot. The wilted sunflower barely held on. We gotta call someone. Poison control or someone.
All right, I hear you.
He snapped the wilted flower in half and put it into his mouth. Still maintaining eye contact, he stared me down, chewing. I didn't know what to say. Lance, you're eating it, I said. You're eating the flower.
Yeah,
He nodded.
I guess.
He scooped up some wilted petals, along with a handful of dirt, slowly consuming it like it was nothing. Little specks of dirt fell from the corner of his mouth, as dry and crunchy as sand. What are you doing?
What?
Still maintaining eye contact. Nothing about what he did seemed to register as something wrong. If anything, I was the one being odd. I looked out at the others, but no one seemed to care. Milan just walked by, smiling and nodding. Lance, you gotta... I leaned forward to take the flower pot away from him, accidentally tearing off the little welcome sign. Lance's demeanor shifted in an instant. Like a wild animal stepping into a fox trap. He pulled the pot back, put it on the file cabinet, and kicked the table over. He assumed this aggressive stance, positioning himself between me and the door. Not a soul reacted. What the fuck are you doing? I yelled. Is anyone seeing this?
What was it you wanted to discuss?
He asked in a neutral, monotone voice.
You got the presentation ready?
I was caught off guard as he suddenly leapt towards me, only to trip on the flipped table. I ran across the room, accidentally knocking over the file cabinet. The yellow flower pot tumbled to the floor as I realized there really was a smell. There was a big green spot of mold behind the file cabinet, reaching into the floor, covered by the old 80s carpet. It had made a soft spot there, where you could physically press your foot down at least half an inch. I looked up, only to see all my coworkers on their feet staring at me. I could even see Phil back on his feet, eyes wide open but head slouched against his shoulder. He was fast asleep, but his body was still standing up. Lance was circling me like a shark. I carefully stepped over the file cabinet.
If there was nothing else, you ought to get back to work.
Lance said.
Get cracking on that presentation.
Milan was lying on the sleeping couch, staring at me, eyes black like a hungry predator. Sorry, I just wanted to check in, I said. Never mind me.
No worries.
Lance leapt over the table and carefully picked up the yellow flower pot. Again, he scooped some dirt up, shoveling it into his mouth.
You're doing great.
He coughed in between bites.
Keep up the good work.
I walked out into our communal workspace, feeling the stares coming at me from every direction. It was as if they didn't know what they were really doing. If one were to close their eyes and listen, it'd just sound like an office. But looking at them, it was a nightmare. Now that I knew what to look for, I could see it everywhere. Pieces of mold reaching into the furniture. The chairs, the tables, the desks. Hell, even the hat rack by the entrance. Now that I knew about it, I could definitely smell it. It had a medicinal sourness to it, like something chemical and nauseating. With every step I took, I could feel it puffing up from the carpet. How hadn't we noticed it? Had we grown so dependent on it so gradually? I couldn't charge my phone, so I tried to go online. Only now did I realize that our internet connection had died. We could fiddle around on our computers all day, but we weren't actually connected to anything. Two of the others were just clicking away, but their screens had long since turned off. Phil seemed to be writing a document, but it was all just jumbled nonsense. And that got me thinking. Milan had been swiping on Tinder. Did he have a connection? I walked over to him, only to see him swiping his fingers against a blank screen. He looked up at me with tired eyes, giving me a forced smile.
Dead in a week.
He nodded.
Yes?
Yes, Milan, in a week. In that environment, it is hard to stay sane. I lost track of time over and over again. There were no deadlines to meet, no meetings, no phone calls. We all just assumed we were constantly in between work. At one point, as I headed to the bathroom, I realized it had been 2 days since the young man knocked on our door. All we did was drink water and hallucinate. At one point, I woke up, thinking everything was fine. It took a whiff of that mold to come crashing back to reality. Phil had started eating the cardboard from the old pizza boxes. Milan was obsessively drinking water like his life depended on it. I hadn't even seen Lance in a couple of days. Our other coworkers were either making out like it was the end of the world or squirming against the carpet like dogs rubbing their backs. With what little clarity I had, I tried to do something. I tried putting up a help sign in the window, but I couldn't find a working pen. Someone had used most of our markers to draw on the bathroom walls. I tried throwing a monitor out the window, but the others just grabbed me and pulled me down to the floor, and I blacked out from the mold smell. The windows were shut, but even if they weren't, there was no way I'd survive a 3-story fall into solid asphalt. Every deadline had come and gone. We were barely even speaking. We just sort of grunted, surviving like locusts. One guy in the corner was severely ill. He could barely breathe. Phil was picking insects out of the carpet like a chimpanzee. Milan was eating his own hair. And still, Lance was nowhere to be seen. That morning, as I wandered about in a daze, I decided to try. That was literally my entire thought. To try. I opened the broom closet only to find Lance. He had curled up in a fetal position and died. There were little sunflower sprouts growing out of his ears, nails, and face. His skin was crackling like dry dirt, and little black insects crawled across his empty white eyes. He'd been dead for a while. A long while. Maybe a week. I grabbed a hammer. I had to try. I walked out of the kitchen and lumbered towards the front door. As soon as I got near it, the others got up. They would try to stop me. Milan, still trying to smile, came up to me. I had to remember to try. Just try. I smacked him across the cheek with my hammer, and he collapsed on the floor. The others started running. Phil lurched forward like a primate, grunting and yelling. The other two followed suit, brandishing keyboards like clubs. I opened the front door and felt that sharp pain immediately. It was like willingly stepping into a furnace. Try, try, try. I felt hands grabbing at me, desperately trying to pull me back. I kept hitting them over and over, breaking fingers, hands, elbows, noses.
Don't be late.
Mumbled Phil.
The review. You're on for 9 o'clock. On your desk. In an hour.
And then Milan looked up at me from the floor, his forced smile missing a tooth.
Dead. In a week.
Finally, as my crusty M&L Company t-shirt failed me, I stumbled into the hallway. I just ran. I ran forward and they refused to follow. Like animals recoiling from flame, they retreated. I heard their screams as my deteriorating body forced its way down the hallway, past the company logo, past the emergency exit plan, past the fire extinguisher. There was no air anymore, just crippling pain. My left leg gave out, but I kept hobbling forward, leaning against the wall. I felt the cool concrete against my skin, soothing the burning pain inside. As I rounded the corner, I collapsed, tumbling down the stairs. Something snapped in my shoulder and my foot was turned the wrong way. I was stuck, like a rock on the ocean floor. The last thing I saw before my vision faded was someone dressed in green. And the last thing I heard was a gasp. And then nothing. I was rescued by a cleaning lady doing her rounds. I was clinically dead for about 20 seconds. but they brought me back and put me on a ventilator. They described it as a severe anaphylactic shock. Could have put me in a coma. I saw it on the news, some of it. The version they wanted us to see. They called it severe carbon poisoning because of a failed ventilation inspection. I watched the news segment where they rolled a black body bag out. I could see it was contorted. There were interviews with the building owner, various health inspectors, and even a few political figures. Our main investor, the Hatchet Group, was appalled. They had been paying us as part of a contract to develop our platform, but agreed that they'd noticed complications. Still, I figured it was strange that they didn't mention not sending a single person to inspect us or hold a meeting. Officially, there'd been a misunderstanding with the independent contractor who was supposed to do an inspection before we moved in. They had already gone bankrupt, so there was no accountability. Administrative oversight, at worst. About a month later, the entire building was scheduled for demolition. Not a single word of mold or fungus. Phil ended up with a serious tracheal infection that cost him his voice. Milan had some sort of infected stomach ulcer and had to be put on an IV. Last thing I heard of him was that he was in a wheelchair. Still coding, though. The other two? They seemingly disappeared off the face of the earth. They were kept out of the papers and were only briefly seen on the news segment. I think one of them moved to Minnesota. The other, I don't know. This was a few years ago, and I've only recently started to remember things more clearly. It's like a fog slowly lifting from my mind. I moved back to my hometown of Juniper to get away from all this. Got a job as a part-time teacher. I want this as a sort of record if something were to happen to me. Because I recently found a strange blue plant growing in my backyard, and I have this dreadful feeling in the pit of my stomach that I might be dead in a week.
Hello and welcome to Daytime, your place for scary stories straight from the horror forums of Reddit. Make sure to like and subscribe for more horror tales of things that go bumping the night. On tonight's episode, a man seeking therapy during COVID lockdown finds himself being manipulated by the person he's seeking help from. So, what would you do if he wasn't there to help?
I had a lot going on during the COVID pandemic. My dad passed away from an unrelated illness, and lockdown was driving me mad. I'd always been a bit paranoid, but being locked inside turned it all up to 11. My home was converted into a makeshift prison, an asylum where I was supposed to be my own caretaker. I didn't have much trouble switching to remote work. I usually worked exclusively with overseas clients anyway, so the only thing that really changed was the software, the chair, and my pre-rendered background. But as days turned to weeks, it became increasingly obvious that I wasn't okay. I'd sleep anywhere from 2 to 12 hours a night, and with no discernible pattern. I'd wake up crying without knowing why. Sometimes I couldn't even open the bathroom door, as I tricked myself into believing there might be someone on the other side. Having lost my dad, I was feeling more mortal than ever. The news, the internet, and the radio were all saying the same thing. Going outside was the end, and at that time in my life, I couldn't handle more death. Everything feels different when you're forced to stay inside. The walls seem closer, and your chest tightens. It feels like the air grows thinner, warmer. You can feel your breaths enter your lungs. They don't sustain you. Your knickknacks and doodads look like souvenirs from a place you can't go back to. A mockery, like notches on a prison wall. Sometimes when I slept, I'd forget what was going on. Waking up, the nightmare would fall on me like a rock, knocking the air out of my lungs. I'd grow increasingly scared of going to sleep, as if that rock would grow heavy enough to crush me. And yet, it was all better than going out there, among the others. I couldn't take a step outside my door. Even if the lockdown was to be lifted that same day, there was no way for me to convince myself that everything was going to be fine. Nothing was fine. And it wouldn't be for some time. My colleague, Dana, was the first to take notice. I'd been up for about 53 hours. She pulled me into a chat after a remote meeting, telling me I looked sick. I melted. I poured my heart out about anything and everything, barely forming a coherent sentence along the way. If someone asked me to recall what I said that day, I could only hazard a guess. Dana tried to understand, but must have realized this was above her pay grade,
I get it. It's a lot right now. It's a lot for all of us.
she said.
It might be time to talk to someone.
She reminded me that we had an agreement with one of our main partners, Hatchet Pharmaceuticals. They handled our health insurance, which also included mental health treatment. In fact, they'd expanded on it since the start of the pandemic,
They got a remote counseling program.
she said, holding up a brochure.
Just use your company login and sign up for a session. What do you think?
There wasn't much to say. I was willing to try anything. I filled out a questionnaire and got a response within a couple of hours. I was sent a link to a calendar app and got to pick a name from a list. There were a couple of short descriptions by each available counselor, giving me a bit of insight into what kind of person they were. There was a man named Gareth who had an empty calendar. It was strange. See, each counselor could be sorted by seniority and number of patients, and Gareth was at the top. He was, by a good margin, their most experienced employee. So how could his schedule be so empty? I signed up for a session with Gareth the next day. It felt like a stone settling in the pit of my stomach. I was nervous, and I didn't even know why. Maybe it was the prospect of a changing routine that scared me. Or maybe it was the thought of opening up to a stranger. Either way, it affected me way more than I thought it would. I went back and forth on canceling the whole thing. I wandered around like a cat on a hot tin roof, feeling the walls closing in. I ended up on the floor, gasping for air, curled up like a ball. I just wanted it to be over. I took a day off work to have my first session. It was just past lunchtime. I'd prepped a cup of Earl Grey and a microwaved cinnamon bun as comfort food, but that wouldn't stop my hands from shaking. I got a pop-up on my screen with a blue sunflower logo. Clicking that connect button felt like dipping my heart in ice water. Gareth popped up in a little video feed. He was a man in his late 50s with combed back salt and pepper hair. He had bushy eyebrows, a trimmed goatee, and a white shirt with a black tie. It looked like he was in a large office with wide open windows. It looked pleasant, airy.
Good afternoon.
He smiled.
I'm glad you could make it. It's difficult to take that first step on a new path.
It really is, I nodded.
But I'm glad you did.
He said.
Now how about we talk a little bit about who we are? Would that be all right?
We took turns talking about ourselves. We shared our names, our professions, our age, and a little bit about our families. Gareth was 57 years old and had worked as a mental health professional for 23 years. He had 2 sons who lived in Philadelphia, just like my mom. We spent some time talking about how we'd adapted to the pandemic and how we felt about having to stay inside, wear masks, and the way it affected the way we looked at other people. I barely noticed it, but Gareth had accidentally made me reveal my issues without me even realizing it. He was good, real good. I had told him about how difficult my life felt, that I felt trapped in my own home, but that the outside was even worse.
You're describing it like you're sailing a frying pan on a sea of fire.
Gareth said.
Like there's no way out. That must be stressful.
He was spot on. It felt hopeless, like spiraling down a black drain, but he just smiled and nodded.
We can work with this.
I decided to see Gareth twice a week. I could book any time I wanted. His calendar was wide open. I wanted to ask him about it, but I didn't. There was a part of me who didn't want to get too personal. Gareth seemed nice, but he was also just doing his job. I was asked to sit by an open window during work hours as an exercise, a way to get used to the sounds of the outside world. It was nerve-wracking. Every passing car felt like a freight train, and every stray voice from a passerby felt like a threat. But slowly, day by day, it turned to background noise. And with that, the world started to feel a little bigger. The walls breathed again. Over the next few sessions with Gareth, we tried a couple new exercises, leaving the window open when I slept, leaving the front door unlocked during work hours. And by our 4th session, he asked me to try something new.
About half an hour a day, right before you go to bed, I want you to open your front door.
He said.
Stand or sit there, taking in the sounds of the city.
That night, I tried it. I opened the front door and sat down, I tried to mentally record everything I saw, one thing at a time. The walkway down the road, the ill-kempt playground. I counted the cars, the windows on nearby buildings, the light posts, the parking meters. I put some conscious thought into observing things from a new perspective. But through it all, the one thing that made me want to go back inside was the sight of other people. It wasn't just the threat of a spreading pandemic. People seemed nefarious to me, ill-willed, dark silhouettes roaming about in the night, their wants and haves a mystery. If the news were an indicator of anything, everyone was struggling to make ends meet. Everyone was a potential assailant. At best, they were indifferent. Perhaps I had it all wrong. Maybe it wasn't the virus closing my throat that was the greatest issue. Maybe the real problem had been people all along. Looking at the nameless shapes staring at me from the windows across the street, that sentiment felt more true than ever. The more sessions I had with Gareth, the more I realized my priorities were changing. I was letting go of my claustrophobic tendencies, but I couldn't help but to feel threatened by the people around the neighborhood instead. Gareth seemed very interested in this, asking me to describe my feelings and mapping out my day. It was very thorough, and I got new exercises to deal with my anxieties. I was asked to record my nightmares and worries. Another day, I was asked to write down stray thoughts on paper. Another day, we had a session about how to practically deal with intruders and how it made me feel that there might be people out there who wanted to harm me. We talked about the many ways people could disappoint you and how easy it was to retreat from the public. But I didn't get a good read on Gareth. It seemed to me like he wasn't really trying to treat me anymore. The exercises he suggested did little but to zoom in on the worst feelings that lingered in the back of my mind. My anxieties were emphasized, not examined. But one thing that remained was my nightly routine to sit with an open door, looking out over the neighborhood. I'd stopped mapping the objects I could see. Instead, focusing on the neighbors, strangers walking past in the night. I had convinced myself that they wanted my money, my car, my brand name clothes, all of it. I had this feeling that if I were to leave my place for a night, I'd come back to it being ransacked if I came back at all. It was easier to just stay inside. One of those nights, however, I saw something. On the other side of the ruined playground, there were a series of row houses. One of the doors were left wide open. I could see the shape of someone standing in the doorway. I could have sworn they were looking straight at me. They didn't move. Were they trying to figure me out? Was this a warning? Over the next few days, I couldn't stop thinking about this potential someone. It's as if I could see them everywhere, and Gareth wasn't helping. He was asking me to describe them, both physical attributes and their actions. It became a bit of a hyperfixation, and I couldn't stop myself from seeing them in the corner of my eye. But the fact was, something was happening out there. I'd see that same person every night, staring at me from across the street. I'd hear footsteps outside at night. Sometimes when I slept, I swear I heard someone messing with my letterbox. It felt ridiculous, and I knew I was exaggerating, but was it really all make-believe? It was a Tuesday when, once again, I logged in to have a session with Gareth. The weather was rough, and some construction work had cut off my high-speed internet. I had to rely on spotty mobile Wi-Fi, and the approaching storm didn't help. Gareth connected, but it took a bit longer than usual. He had the same half-smile as always. I noted that he seemed to have good weather, which was a bit of a surprise. I thought he lived in the area.
Mr. Martin,
He said.
I'm glad you could join me.
I froze. I checked my webcam, making sure it was working properly. The resolution was a bit spotty, but there was no question about it. My face was clear enough. My name is not Martin. Not only should Gareth know that, but he could also see and hear me. It was very strange. I was caught off guard. Of course, I said. I wouldn't miss it. Gareth sat completely still, looking straight ahead. He was silent for almost a full minute, then sort of sprung to life. I thought that maybe the storm was interrupting the Wi-Fi, but it seemed to be working fine. Maybe there was an issue with Gareth's calendar app. Then again, if that was the case, how come he didn't recognize me?
Have you been keeping up with your exercises?
He asked. Yeah, I said, yeah, I have.
So let's hear it then.
He continued.
What did you learn?
About what? Gareth leaned back in his chair and chuckled. It was a warm sound, but there was something hollow in it. The screen froze, and in a heartbeat, he was back to leaning forward, looking straight into the camera.
About your target.
I barely had to say anything. This Martin person had come to Gareth for an issue similar to mine, something he had diagnosed as general anxiety disorder. It seemed like Gareth had poked and prodded Martin in a way that focused their issues on an external threat. Other people. A neighbor? I stood up, stepping away from my laptop, but leaving the conversation running. I peered out my living room window. What do you think I'll do to this neighbor? I asked.
We've talked about this.
Gareth responded. I know, I repeated. But I want to hear what you think.
I'm afraid you might murder them.
I looked back at the screen. Gareth just stared straight ahead, not moving a muscle. No emotion, just a matter-of-fact statement. I felt the moisture on my tongue evaporate as something sour crept up my throat. And what do you think about that, Gareth? I asked. He didn't blink. A full 20 seconds of silence passed. The only sound I could hear was my own heartbeat.
I think you're going to do what you need to do to heal,
he said.
And I want you to heal, Mr. Martin.
At any cost?
Of course.
There were a couple of people outside passing by in the night. Someone with a thick coat, another with a trucker cap, one with a backpack, another on their phone, some with their hands in their pockets, someone holding something dark, a gun, a knife. But no one stepped up to my door. No one came knocking. But there was someone standing in an open door on the other side of the playground, looking my way, like they'd done on so many other nights. Maybe they were making a difficult decision. The meeting with Gareth ran out of time, and I dove onto the net. My hands were shaking so much I could barely spell. I checked it all. The name of the program, the pharmaceutical company, Gareth. Everything and anything I could get my hands on. There wasn't much to see. Paper trails came to sudden ends. Names were scrubbed or removed. Most people working on the platform were hired as outside consultants, and there was no way to trace what kind of money they were moving or where. And Gareth, he was a puzzle piece. For everything he told me, none of it was specific enough for me to look up. There were no names of his children for me to track. No address where he lived. No mention of his previous place of employment. Running out of options, I called up my colleague Dana. It was 11 p.m., but I had to get answers. Dana was skeptical, but she could tell I was upset. She wasn't enthused about getting back in front of her computer, but I got her to look up a couple things. It didn't take long for her to find something curious.
Hatchet has a company policy about billable consultant hours.
She said.
They have a maximum number of billable hours. If someone goes past this, they need to be hired as a full-time employee.
How does that relate to their remote platform?
Gareth and a handful of others go way above this average. They ought to be full-time employees, but there's nothing that says they are.
So they're bending their own policy a little, so what?
There'd be a paper trail.
She continued.
We have a close association with them. We got access to their meeting protocols. Policy exemptions need to go through the board. So the only way I see it, there is only two ways to make sense of this.
She took off her glasses and leaned into her camera, lowering her voice.
Either this program is run illegally or these people don't exist.
I thanked Dana and got back online. There was no way I'd be sleeping that night anyway. A stray thought hit me, and I got back on the calendar app. Even now, in the middle of the night, Gareth was available. I booked an immediate meeting with him. That gave me an idea. Using my phone and a separate login, I checked his calendar again. According to it, he was free, despite me having booked that time already. So, I booked him again, 2 calls at the same time, and at the same time, a connect button popped up on my phone. I clicked both buttons at once. Gareth popped up with the same smile as always, sun shining from his open windows.
Good evening,
Said Gareth on my computer. Everything all right? Asked the Gareth on my phone. There were 2 of them. They were talking at the same time. I turned off my phone and leaned back. My pulse was rising. I had no idea what I was even looking at anymore. I'd been paranoid about people for weeks. maybe months, but there'd been a mystery in front of my face all along. "You're not real, are you?" I asked.
Of course I am.
He laughed.
I'm right here. Is this what you need to discuss? Are you having issues separating fantasy from reality?
"No," I spat back. "No, you don't get to do that. I'm not imagining this."
Then I don't know what to say.
He shrugged.
I'm as real as can be. I'm right here.
"Then how come you're saying two different things on two different screens, Gareth?" Gareth didn't answer. He looked off screen as if considering something. He looked back up at me, still smiling.
I'm sorry,
He said,
but I have an urgent patient issue that I need to resolve.
My laptop shut off. Seconds later, my phone went black, and someone was coming up the stairs. Before my heart could skip a beat, something slammed into my front door. I raised my arms as if to shield myself from the sound, and a second later I heard the hinges buckle and snap. Then, something broke. Something splintered. I rushed to my kitchen, passing the entrance. There was someone standing by the broken door. I only saw them in passing, dressed in dark, ill-fitting clothes. I grabbed the first sharp thing I could get a hold of. Armed with a kitchen knife, I backed myself up against the wall, knocking over a few doodads in the window. It was a long way down, but if I had to, I'd rather have a shot at breaking a leg rather than dying. But I couldn't get the damn thing open. A stranger stepped into the hallway. About 6'3", dressed in a navy blue hoodie and a black leather jacket. Leather gloves curled around an honest-to-God machete. A face obscured by a burlap sack with holes poked out around wide-open green eyes. Shoulders heaving with excited breaths. He rushed forward, grabbed one of my kitchen chairs, and threw it across the room. It broke against the wall, knocking over a photo. Shattered glass covered the floor. Something whistled past my left shoulder and slammed into the kitchen tap with a metallic clang. It made my ears screech. I steadied myself against the kitchen table, and it was casually tossed aside with a crash. I headed straight for the door. For the first time in months, I didn't consider my anxieties. I had to get out. Then, something cold grabbed my neck. Leather gloves. I reached back with my kitchen knife, but lost my footing on the broken glass. I was sent tumbling to the ground, landing hard on my shoulder. I looked up to see a raised machete, and those sparkling green eyes. I had to say something. Anything. "Mr. Martin?" It was the first thing that came to mind. The machete hung in the air, ready to fall. He hesitated. "You're Mr. Martin. You're speaking with Gareth, right?" There was no response, just excited, heaving breaths and a shaking machete, frozen in place like a living statue. "He's tricking you. United States. He's tricking us. He's not real, Mr. Martin. He's not real." Something clicked. A heavy boot stepped on my wrist, kicking my knife away. The machete crept closer, cold steel resting on my chin. I felt the warmth leave the tip of my fingers.
"I win.
A hoarse voice wheezed.
I got you first."
"I'm not playing any games." "I'm not." For the first time, he blinked. He tilted his head. I continued. "I'm not playing Mr. Martin. You can't be first if I'm not playing."
"You were trying to get me first."
"No, I wasn't."
"You're lying."
The tip of the machete pushed into my skin, shaving a couple of hairs and cutting a 2-inch gash across my jaw. Pain, like sharp ice, spread across my face. Then a noise. A loud electronic noise. My phone must have come back on. Martin stopped. He was having trouble hiding his glee. He was giggling like a schoolboy. And this was funny to him, if anything.
"Answer it."
He chuckled.
"I want them to hear."
I took my phone out. It was Dana.
"Answer it."
He repeated.
"Put it on speaker."
So I did. Dana's voice came through. Something about what we talked about had kept her up as well. She had always been the kind of person who couldn't let go of a good mystery.
You gotta hear this.
She said, going straight into a rant.
I think I got something.
I held up the phone for Martin to hear as Dana explained her findings. It turned out the program wasn't supported by our healthcare deal. It was just registered as a support feature, and it was included in the same paperwork. It was never literally spelled out as a health service. Looking into the fine print, it It was specified as a technical support feature.
You get it?
She laughed.
They're not a mental health care provider. They're hired to handle data collection.
What? I whispered.
They're gathering data. That's their primary function. Data like mental health problems, stress-related issues, ages, locations, trends, dreams, wants.
Or how fast they can get us to kill one another. Dana laughed. I looked up at Martin. He wasn't laughing. The machete pierced my phone as he flicked it across the floor. His eyes sunk. He didn't look as excited anymore. His shoulders slumped with a loud sigh.
You're not playing.
He wheezed. No, I'm not. He took his foot off my arm. I could feel the warmth running back into my fingertips. With the casual stroll of someone heading to the supermarket, he headed for the exit. Without looking back, he shared a few parting words.
I would have won.
Over the next few days, we lost access to the program. Dana and I couldn't do or say anything. Turns out they had baked more than we'd anticipated into the terms of service. It explicitly stated that it was an experimental service and wasn't to be used as a substitute for conventional mental health care. It was all just data collection. Some artificial program meant to get people talking, engaging them and pushing them to tell them more and more and more, not aiming to help them or guide them, but to get them to return talk and stay engaged with the platform. And this Martin guy? Turns out there was no neighbor with that name. There was, however, a man who'd been found dead in the row house across the street, slashed to pieces and kept in plastic bags in a bathtub. Someone had been squatting there since the beginning of the pandemic. Someone who the neighbors described as a strange man with bright green eyes. I think Gareth was just keeping this murderer engaged, poking him to go further, to do more, and to stay occupied. I don't think it was a conscious decision. It was just algorithms. Oddly enough, I think my paranoid tendencies have eased. As the pandemic came to an end, I figure something as absurd as this whole thing won't happen to the same person twice. No matter what I run into out there, I don't think it's going to be another killer. It's freeing in a way. If I can survive this, I can survive.
Hello and welcome to Daytime, your place for scary stories straight from the horror forums of Reddit. Make sure to like and subscribe for more horror tales of things that go bumping the night. On tonight's episode, a man experiences a horrific accident that leaves him blind. But the need for independence causes him to seek a special kind of job. So, where's your job located? Because I work in the all-blind laboratory.
I got my PhD from the Stockholm Royal Institute of Technology and finished my postdoctoral work at the University of Bern in Switzerland in 2015. I won't go into detail, but my work centered around electromagnetic disruption and practical electromedical application. Chances are that if you check Google Scholar for these keywords, my name will pop up as a co-author on at least one of the top 5 results. However, in early December of 2016, I was in an accident. I was staying overnight for a conference in Copenhagen, where a colleague of mine had rented a large apartment. However, due to an electrical error, there was heat buildup in the main water heater, causing a steam explosion. I was sleeping pretty much wall to wall with it. My face and shoulders took the main brunt of the boiling water, steam, and pressure. The last thing I remember seeing was a bright light, followed by a sudden and complete dark. I had to go through evisceration and enucleation of both eyes. I lost 8 teeth on the right side of my face and most of my nose. At least 20% of the body fat in my right arm was burned off. The reconstructive surgery of my face took a team of surgeons 18 hours. This was followed by months of just trying to survive, moving back in with my family and going through cosmetic surgery, mainly for my face. To this day, I still have no idea what was said at the conference. After a few months, I was fitted for double eye prosthetics. It took a total of 3 months before I was even given the option to start therapy. I'm not gonna lie, it was the hardest thing I've ever done. Most people who are legally blind can still perceive some kind of light, but complete blindness, about 7% of us, is one step further. One day I could be suicidal, and the next day I was determined to learn Braille, because Because of the damage to my eyelids, the surgeons opted to connect new tear ducts to my nose, a dacryocysterinostomy, so crying just made my nose run. 3 years later, I was in a much better state of mind. Although sudden blindness isn't something you ever really adapt to, I was doing better. I still wasn't ready to go out on my own, but with a friend or family member just to help me along, I could go pretty far. I also learned to appreciate all those weird accessibility options that come with most computers. You have no idea. In autumn of 2019, I was contacted by a man who told me he represented a group associated with renewable energy research. Living in Sweden, renewable energy is a big deal, and it is something I've personally been interested in. In fact, it was going to be the subject of my next article, just before the accident. The man offered me a job. He told me that he worked at a lab with disabled scientists, and that my expertise was in high demand. The pay was more than generous, and as a benefit package, I would be given a personal assistant. Pay for an off-site 2-bedroom apartment was also a part of the benefits. I agreed to have an interview. The man who was going to interview me was clearly from another country, but he was ready to fly out to meet me at short notice. He came to visit the very next day. We had a private conversation at my parents' house. He asked a lot of questions about my work, and I could hear him tapping away at a touchscreen. We discussed some of the details, but there was one thing he consciously seemed to avoid: where the main lab was located. He knew a lot of it. Northwesters problem long the nothing down with lunch. He told about it. To absorb the fleet under if I could made in the moment for census materials. The entire I dormant voice I will start breathing. Pace one back. Get the chance once you protect my dick. I have helped. Tell me beaconly. I did. I've been drugged hand someone who doesn't think about their sense of touch too often, but I've touched that mirror every night for years on end by now. I know exactly